Focus Features and Blumhouse present Obsession.
When I have a crush on a guy, no one knows.
Be careful.
I wish Nikki loved me more than anyone in the entire world.
Who you wish for. Obsession is 96% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
I love you so much.
It's blood-soaked nightmare fuel.
What kind of spells you put on her?
You have been warned. Obsession. Rated R. Under 17. Animated without parent. Only in theaters May 15th. With special engagements in Dolby.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where we discuss true crime cases involving the military and veteran community. And we do that all with one goal in mind, to remind us to remain vigilant always. If you've been following along for the last 2 weeks, you know that we are in a mini-series involving the 1970 case of the MacDonald family massacre out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's a case that has been recommended over a dozen times, and let me just say, now I know why. If you haven't listened to part 1 or part 2 yet, stop, go listen, then meet me back here for part 3. In part 1, we dug into the crime scene at 544 Castle Drive. In part 2, we talked about the absolute chaos of the Article 32 hearing. But to really understand what happened that night in February of 1970, we have to look at the people at the heart of this case. Because on the surface, Jeffrey and Colette MacDonald appeared to be the golden couple of the late 1960s. They seemed to be building a life that many others just dreamed of. But things aren't always what they seem. So today, for part 3, we are digging into their backgrounds because maybe, just maybe, the image portrayed had some cracks that you can only see in retrospect. I will also be discussing what happened between when the Article 32 hearing occurred and when the new trial took place. And I will also be discussing the book Fatal Vision very briefly at the end. So with that, join me today as I continue this mini-series on the MacDonald family massacre. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Jeffrey Robert MacDonald was born on October 12, 1943 in Jamaica, New York. He was born to parents Robert and Dorothy MacDonald. He had an older brother, James, and a younger sister, Judy. And when he was about 4 or 5 years old, he and his family relocated to Patchogue, Long Island. Jeff's father was an electrical engineer and a contractor, and he passed away when Jeff was in his early 20s. Jeff was an all-American kid. He was involved in anything and everything. And he was not only charismatic, but he was also uber smart. The kind of smart that doesn't even need to study type of smart. You know, this guy just got it. By the time he got to high school, all the adults could tell that he was destined for greatness. I mean, kids his own age could tell as well. He was involved in everything, but not just involved like he showed up to a meeting once a month. He actually ran the organizations. He was class president, student council president, school paper editor. He was in the band and the orchestra. And he was a student athlete as well. On the football field, he was a defensive captain, and on the basketball court, he was named co-captain. Now picture this. At the end of senior year, when they were all handing out superlatives, Jeff was named most popular and most likely to succeed. He did all of this, plus he graduated number 3 in a class of 200 high school students. Leaping out of high school, he was accepted into the prestigious Princeton University, where he majored in psychology. Using a $1,000 scholarship together with a school loan, Jeff was able to attend the Ivy League school. But Jeff was a working class student, so he picked up a part-time job as a cook to pay his way through college expenses. Despite having to work part-time, he left college after 3 years because he was accepted into medical school early, which I had to look into that because I didn't even realize that was a thing, but I guess back then it was. Jeff went on, after 3 years at Princeton, to attend Northwestern University Medical School in Chicago. And guess what happened when he was in medical school? He continued to excel there as well. He was inducted into Alpha Omega Alpha, an honorary medical society that didn't just pride itself on good grades, but also on moral conduct. At the end of medical school, Jeff graduated 12th out of 164 future doctors. So how exactly did Jeff's path cross with Colette's path? They actually met when they were both just 12 years old. Colette Catherine Stevenson was born on May 10, 1943 in New York. When Colette was born, her mother Mildred was thrilled. She already had a son named Bob, but always wanted to have a little girl. After several miscarriages, Colette was born, and she was the apple of her mother's eye. But Colette's early life was marked by both love and loss. Her biological father passed away after he lost a battle with suicide in 1956. His death was hard on Colette, who was just entering her teen years. Her mom, Mildred, met a man soon after she was widowed, and within the year, she was married to the man, and his name was Alfred Kassab, who went by Freddie. Freddie Kassab actually has a very interesting backstory himself. He was born in Canada to wealthy Syrian parents and educated in elite schools throughout Europe. At 18, he joined the Canadian Army and worked intel. As an intel guy, he was even dropped behind enemy lines during the French resistance. He was injured various times during combat, but the biggest hit that he took was when his wife and daughter were killed by a German bomb dropped on London. After leaving the Army, he moved to the United States and lived in New York. There, he worked as a salesman in the Sears in Brooklyn. Freddie was eventually remarried, but was in the process of obtaining a divorce when he suddenly met Mildred. Anyway, Colette and her stepfather, Freddie, were close, and even though he was her stepdad, he was her father. And since Freddie had lost his first wife and child during World War II, he treated his stepkids as his own. He would go on to play a deeply significant role not only in Colette's life, but eventually in how this entire case played out. Colette and Jeff began dating in high school, and their relationship quickly became serious. They were young, but they were both outgoing, and they envisioned a future together. In high school, Colette was also very involved. She was a cheerleader, she sang in the choir, and she was a member of the Future Teachers Club, the Pep Club, and a yearbook staff member. Eventually, when it was time for college, as you know, Jeff went to Princeton, and Colette attended Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. And throughout college, Colette and Jeff maintained, this kind of like on-again, off-again relationship. For whatever reason, they were always drawn back to each other. And since their colleges were kind of close, she was in New York, he was in New Jersey, and they were only a few hours away, they kept their relationship going. But then in 1963, reality really set in for the couple. At the end of sophomore year, Colette discovered she was pregnant. The 70s is not like today where someone gets pregnant and the parents don't stay together. Back then, if someone got pregnant out of wedlock, a marriage immediately followed because, of the perception. That's why we call it a shotgun wedding. Well, that's exactly what happened here. Both still in college, both only 20 years old, if that, Colette and Jeff were married on September 14th, 1963. Jeff stayed in college, but Colette dropped out, and 7 months later, on April 14th, 1964, Kimberly was born to the couple. The early years of the MacDonald marriage was a grind. While Jeff was in medical school in Chicago, they struggled financially, but they survived. You can say that they were dogged entrepreneurs before that became a trendy thing to be, They actually managed a makeshift Airbnb, if you may. They rented out a few extra rooms to weekend lodgers and acted as chaperones. Colette worked as a babysitter and even wrote student papers for extra cash. On May 8, 1967, the couple welcomed their second daughter, Kristen. Throughout those years, many say that Jeff was charming, sometimes a little too charming, and definitely self-centered. And they also mentioned that he engaged in flirtatious behaviors outside of his marriage. Whether they turned into full-blown affairs is debated, but just wait, we'll get to affairs in just a little bit. Jeff eventually graduated from medical school in 1968, and he took on an internship. The medical school internships rotated every 3 months back then, but he was going in at the time when medical practices were allowing interns to specialize early on, and Jeff picked up an internship in surgery at Columbia Presbyterian. At some point, he obtained his medical license in New York State. After his internship, there were 2 options available to him. 1, go into a residency program, or 2, join one of the military branches and serve as a doctor there. Jeff chose to join the Army because he realized the financial benefits. He also wanted a, quote, break with more time off, end quote, and he wanted to go to Vietnam. Jeff joined the Army in late June 1969. He was assigned to Headquarters Company of 3rd Special Forces Group in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. But before he officially started his gig there, he had to attend some training. Eventually, he arrived in Bragg in late August 1969, and after 4 days in the unit as a physician, by day 5, they made him the group surgeon. After arriving in North Carolina, Jeff applied to obtain his North Carolina medical license. And the reason why he obtained a North Carolina medical license was that while he worked as an Army doctor, he moonlighted as an ER doctor in the civilian sector, specifically at Cape Fear Valley Hospital and Hamlet Hospital. Of course, in order to have that type of off-duty employment, Jeff did obtain permission from his commander. Jeff continued as the group surgeon for the 3rd Special Forces Group, but in December, he moved from the 3rd to the 6th Group, and on January 1st, 1970, he was the 2nd medical officer of the group, and he became the preventive medicine officer. Now, I want to take a quick break because I just think it's interesting. The entire time I had heard about Jeffrey MacDonald's case and him being a doctor, I always envisioned that he had been a doctor for a couple of years. But this guy had only really been serving as a doctor during his internship and then here with the military for approximately 7-ish months before the murders occurred. Okay, so I just wanted to say that because it always struck me as people believing that he was like this big, well-known doctor, whereas he was really just getting his feet wet when the murders occurred.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
By this point, this is January of 1970. By this point in Jeff's career and family life, things were more stable than they were when he was in medical school. And it was more from the financial front. But a peek behind the curtain really revealed that things weren't necessarily great. You see, Jeff was a bit of let's call him a ladies' man. Because besides him having a wife at home and 2 daughters who loved him dearly, he was a cheater, pumpkin eater. And while on his first training TDY, before he even arrived at his first duty station, Jeff cheated on his wife with some random woman. In December of 1969, he had another affair while TDY. Now, these 2 affairs were discovered prior to the Article 32 hearing, so he was questioned about them during that hearing, and he basically just said they were one-time things, it was just a fling, it wasn't that big of a deal. Colette may never have known about these affairs, but it was a secret that Jeff was hopeful would never be revealed. And it wasn't just the affairs. Jeff picked up an amphetamine habit. In the months leading up to the murders, Jeff took amphetamines, which he called speed, and he took this medication in order to lose 15 pounds. Now that he was active in the military and he was around these guys that were in really good shape, he wanted to keep up. To reduce the effects of the speed, however, he took something called copazine. I mean, it's evident that Jeff was losing himself in the military. He was trying to be everything and do everything in his own strength. He seemed to have this idea that he could continue to do 1 million things at once, but reality set in, and that's when he looked for outside sources like drugs and sex to help him cope. I mean, it's to the point where Jeff MacDonald explained that at one point, he was working his regular military job, 8 to 5. Then on weekends, he was working 24-hour shifts, meaning 6 a.m. on a Sunday to 6 a.m. on a Monday, then turning around and heading to his Army gig at 8 a.m. that Monday morning. But get this, as the preventive medicine officer, Jeff served as the drug abuse counselor for his unit. Yep. He also previously had to deal with what he called the, quote, fat man's program, end quote, which I believe is the actual term they used back then for either overweight troops or troops who were not meeting their fitness standards. In any event, it was ironic to later learn about his drug abuse with Speed, considering that he was the drug abuse counselor on base. And to top it off, when he became the preventive officer, a chaplain actually briefed the troops about drug abuse and apparently explained that the Army doesn't have patient privilege between the troops and medical professionals when it comes to discussing drug abuse. When troops learned this bombshell, they began to say that Captain MacDonald was a fink, meaning that he was a rat and would turn you in if you confessed to using drugs. Now, we don't know what, if any, of this Colette knew, because Colette was doing her own thing. You see, by the winter of 1969, beginning of 1970, Colette was pregnant with their third child, a son that they intended to name John, and the baby was due in late June, early July, and it was apparently a high-risk pregnancy. But besides that, Colette was thriving. She had recently started night school back up and had been taking classes at the University of North Carolina. Now, this discussion leads us right to the weekend before the murders. So I want to explain what happened leading up to the murders. That Sunday at 6 a.m., Jeff began a 24-hour shift at Hamlet Hospital. He described Hamlet Hospital as a small country hospital roughly 60 miles from Fort Bragg. According to him, that day, he saw roughly 24 patients total, and that was during an entire 24-hour period. But the wee morning hours, he says those were kind of quiet. He saw a patient at 10 p.m., another at 11:30 p.m., and then at 12:30 a.m., he saw his last patient. At about 1 a.m., he went to sleep in the hospital sleeping room. At 6 a.m., he left and returned to his house on Fort Bragg. There, he had breakfast with his family. He showered, he shaved, he put on his uniform, and he reported for duty promptly at 8 a.m. At 5 p.m., he arrived back home, and shortly after that, he took his daughters to feed their pony. Then they had dinner together, and after dinner, at about 6:15 p.m., Colette said goodbye to the family, got into her car, and headed to her night class. After Colette left, Jeff put the dishes away. He had Kristen in bed by 7 p.m. and Kimberly in bed by 9 p.m. Meanwhile, Colette attended a child psychology class that night, where the topic of children sleeping in bed with their parents and bedwetting came up. Colette actually chimed in during this conversation, and she wanted to discuss one of her children who often came into the bedroom and how her husband quickly returned the child to their own bedroom. The professor actually agreed with this course of action and explained that it was appropriate to acknowledge a child's feelings when they came into your bedroom, but it was also important to return the child back to their own bedroom. That night, Colette drove one of her classmates named Christia home, but made a pit stop at the shopette to pick up some milk. Christia remembered staying in the car because it was raining when Colette was grabbing that milk. Colette then dropped Christia off at her home at roughly 9:45 p.m. According to Christia, Colette appeared relaxed and calm the last time she saw her. And just like that, Christia became the last non-family member to see Colette alive. During his Article 32 hearing testimony, Jeff described that Colette arrived home after class. She rustled through her school notebooks, put away the milk, and changed into her pajamas. After this, she had a sweet dessert drink and sat with him on the couch. There, they talked and watched TV. Specifically, they were watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. During their chat, Colette talked about her class. She liked her professor and even mentioned Kristen's bedwetting and habit of crawling into their bed at night. At about midnight, Colette called it a night and went to the primary room to sleep. Jeff stayed in the living room watching TV and reading a novel. And this is when everything changed. During part 2 of this miniseries, I noted that I was unsure why the Army released Jeffrey MacDonald in December of 1970, since he had only served 18 months or so. But as I came across an appellate case review, I found the answer. After the Army dropped the charges, Jeff was honorably discharged based on his personal hardship request. But get this, even after Jeff left the military, the Department of Justice quietly asked CID to continue its investigation into the homicides, so they did. By June of 1972, CID finished their portion of the report of investigation, and they forwarded the 13-volume report to the Department of Justice with the recommendation that they continue to investigate. Mind you, behind the scenes, Mr. Kassab was pushing to keep the case alive. CID submitted additional reports to the Department of Justice in November of 1972 and in August of 1973. Finally, in August of 1974, after extensive investigation, including the exhumation of the bodies for re-examination, DOJ presented the case to a grand jury. Jeffrey MacDonald testified after waiving his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. He testified at the grand jury hearing for over 5 days. In addition to his testimony, numerous other witnesses testified, and then an indictment against Jeffrey MacDonald was issued in January of 1975 for the 3 murders.
You tell yourself no one wants your college-era band tees, but on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Remember when I said last episode that Jeff fought like hell to get out of those charges? Well, he did. The first thing he did was argue speedy trial issues. He filed a motion to dismiss the entire case due to speedy trial violations. The district court denied the motion to dismiss, and on an interlocutory appeal, which means the case was paused to allow the appellate court to make a decision, the Court of Appeals, no kidding, reversed the lower court decision. They sided with MacDonald's defense and held that the delay between the June 1972 CID report to DOJ to the 1974 grand jury, that time frame violated Jeffrey's Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial. The Fourth Circuit then made an interesting ruling, stating that Jeff could not appeal the initial denial of his motion to dismiss on speedy trial grounds until after the trial. Well, we will get to what happened at trial next time, but for now, I just wanted to point out that after the charges were dismissed, CID did continue their investigation. And boy, what they uncovered. While they were aware of at least 2 affairs that Jeff had prior to the Article 32 hearing, it was during this subsequent, more thorough investigation that CID became aware that MacDonald had at least 15 girlfriends, 15. He had at least 15 girlfriends outside of his marriage. Many of these women claimed that they were seduced by MacDonald while he was away on training missions. And remember the question about whether Colette knew about the affairs? Well, this subsequent deep dive discovered a witness who revealed that Colette knew more than she let on. You see, Colette had an older brother who was married to a woman named Vivian Stevenson, and Vivian went by Pep. Pep was Colette's sister-in-law, and it turned out that they were good friends and they spoke often. As reported by Vanity Fair, Pep revealed to CID that Colette not only knew about Jeff's affairs, but she complained incessantly about them. She'd say things like, "I give up, I don't want to do this anymore." In fact, before her murder, Colette revealed to Pep that Jeff was going on another TDY, this time a 3-month tour as the physician for the Fort Bragg boxing team. And not just was he going on this TDY, but it would have him away from home during the tail end of her high-risk pregnancy. And Colette was not happy about the situation, especially because she knew he was a cheating SOB. Colette actually called her mom and told her, "Mom, I want to come back home with the kids." Mildred advised Colette to wait until spring. Sadly, 2 days after that conversation, Colette and the kids were dead. And Jeff's affairs, well, they continued after the murders. CID learned that Jeff had been having an affair with a Fort Bragg secretary, and the secretary revealed that even as he stood accused of murder by the military, they were having sex, quote, "as often as possible," end quote. Well, after Jeff left the military, he ended up in California. And not just was he working as an ER doctor at St. Mary Medical Center, but he was living in an upscale marina front condo and yachting on weekends. Meanwhile, he'd often call CID to ask them when they planned to close the case and what he could do to expedite the process. He even submitted to additional interviews while CID still had the case open. But here's where things take a turn. Once Jeff realized he would actually be standing trial for the murder of his family, he made a very calculated decision. He wanted control over how the world saw him, control over the narrative, and ultimately, control over his legacy. So he began looking for a writer, and not just any writer, but someone who could tell his story, follow the trial, and in Jeff's mind, prove to the world that he was innocent. And that's when he found Joe McGinnis. Now, the relationship between Jeffrey MacDonald and Joe McGinnis is, without exaggeration, one of the most fascinating and controversial relationships in true crime history. At the time, Joe McGinnis was a major name in journalism. He had already written a best-selling political book and had built a reputation for getting unusually close to his subjects. He didn't just report stories, he immersed himself in them. And Jeff saw that as an opportunity. In June of 1979, Jeffrey MacDonald personally invited McGinnis to write a book about his case. But this wasn't a typical arrangement. Jeff didn't just offer an interview and maybe some occasional access. He offered something almost unheard of at the time. He offered complete access to himself, access to his defense team, and a front row seat to the trial itself. From Jeff's perspective, this was strategic. He believed that if McGinnis could see everything up close and personal, if he could hear the evidence, observe the process, and get to know him personally, then Joe would come to the same conclusion Jeff had been insisting all along, that Jeffrey MacDonald was innocent. Joe McGinnis was intrigued. The case was already drawing national attention, and this level of access was rare at the time. So he agreed, but with one important caveat. He told Jeff that if he was going to write this book, he needed complete freedom to tell the story as he saw it. And Jeff agreed. Jeff signed an agreement allowing McGinnis to write the book without restriction. At the same time, McGinnis also signed an agreement with the defense team, promising that he would not reveal or leak any defense strategy during the trial. And just like that, Joe McGinnis became embedded, not just as an observer, but as an insider. He sat with the defense attorneys, he attended strategy sessions, he followed the trial from inside the defense camp. And perhaps most importantly, he spent a significant amount of time with Jeff himself. Over time, the relationship between the two men grew closer. They talked frequently. They corresponded by mail. Jeff opened up to Joe in ways he likely would not have with anyone else. To Jeff, Joe McGinnis wasn't just a writer anymore. He was a confidant, a friend, someone who he believed was on his side. But here's where everything changes. Because while McGinnis was sitting inside that courtroom, while he was reviewing the evidence, listening to testimony, and watching Jeff extra closely, something shifted. Privately, internally, Joe McGinnis began to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald was guilty. Joe McGinnis was not uncertain. He wasn't on the fence. He was full-blown on the Jeffrey MacDonald is guilty camp. And here's the part that makes this so controversial. After that shift happened in Joe McGinnis's mind, he never told Jeff. Instead, he continued the relationship as if he was going to be writing the story the way that Jeff intended. He continued the conversations. He continued the correspondence. He continued to present himself as someone that Jeff could and should trust. Even after Jeff was convicted, that relationship didn't stop. From prison, Jeff wrote to Joe. He shared his thoughts, his frustrations, his version of events. And McGinnis kept listening. He kept gathering. He kept writing. And then, in 1983, 4 years after the trial had aired, Joe McGinnis published his book. His book was titled Fatal Vision. It became an immediate bestseller. But when Jeffrey MacDonald learned what was in that book, it was nothing like what he expected. Because inside of the book, the words, instead of the words portraying him as an innocent man who was wrongfully accused, the book painted Jeffrey MacDonald as something entirely different. It painted him as a narcissistic personality, a manipulator, a man who had murdered his entire family. McGinnis even developed his own theory, guys, that the killings occurred during a drug-fueled psychotic rage, possibly linked to the amphetamine use. For Jeff, this wasn't just disappointing, it was a betrayal. But with Jeff behind bars and the book sales this high, Fatal Vision was adapted into a TV miniseries which aired in 1984. That same year, Jeffrey MacDonald sued the pants off of Joe McGinnis. He was suing him for fraud and breach of contract, arguing that McGinnis had deceived him, pretending to believe in his innocence in order to gain his trust and extract information, only to do a complete 180 and use it against him. And this case was serious. It actually went to a fully litigated trial in 1987. I know I'm getting ahead of myself because I haven't even told you about the trial yet. But listen, I will get to that. The result of this 1987 civil fraud and breach of contract case was crazy. The jury couldn't decide. They were deadlocked. Eventually, the case was settled out of court, with MacDonald receiving approximately $325,000. Now, I'm going to get back to this money here in a minute, okay? But the impact of this relationship and this settlement, it didn't end there. It didn't end with civil court. Because what happened between Jeffrey MacDonald and Joe McGinnis, it sparked a much bigger conversation. It's a conversation that still exists today. A conversation about journalism, a conversation about ethics, and a conversation about where the line is drawn between reporting the truth and betraying trust to get it. And that question, whether McGinnis crossed that line, is one that people are still debating decades later. Now, I want to circle back to the money that Jeff received in this settlement. They settled for $325,000, remember? After Jeffrey MacDonald received that settlement from Joe McGinnis, the story didn't just end there, because Colette's family had already taken legal action of their own. You see, in a separate civil suit, they sued Jeffrey MacDonald for wrongful death, and they won. During that trial, or during that case, a North Carolina court found Jeffrey MacDonald civilly liable for the deaths of Colette and the children, which meant something very important. It meant that any money that MacDonald had or would receive in the future could be pursued by the family to satisfy that judgment. So while the $325,000 settlement might have looked like a win on paper, in reality, it was never truly Jeff's to keep anyway. But wait, because eventually, decades after the brutal murders, someone would review Jeff's case and truly begin to believe in his innocence. And that's when another book was born. And that book was titled Wilderness of Errors, and it was published in 2012. But wait, now I'm getting way ahead of myself here, right? Next time, in part 4, I will walk you through the trial and appeals. And in part 5, I think I'm going to be walking you through the Wilderness of Errors to close out this miniseries. I want to make sure that you guys hear all the different stories and different, kind of beliefs and theories that are out there before wrapping up this miniseries. So with that said, I will catch you next time for part 4. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for all of your support. I know that you guys are all loving this miniseries because there is just so much information and so many nuances. Researching and writing this miniseries has been a little bit of a wild ride for me. I usually write series completely from start to finish, but this one I'm kind of writing as I go. And so every single week as I'm researching and writing, I really thought I had heard the full story, but reading it and reading testimony and then reading all of the little tiny nuggets that are written about this case, it's just so different. Anyway, I am wishing all of the mamas in the True Crime Army a happy Mother's Day. Be sure to join me next week for part 4. My sources for this miniseries include various appellate court opinions, as well as case documents found on 2 websites. One is MacDonaldCaseFacts.com and CrimeArchives.net. I also relied on excerpts from the book Fatal Vision and articles on Oxygen, Vanity Fair, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Columbia Journalism Review, ABC News, and People magazine. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you part 4 of the MacDonald family murders next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.